Well, we begin on this Sunday in South Carolina by connecting you to the nation's capital, which was the center of a heated debate this week. Planned Parenthood and its funding being weighed by the highest court in this land because of an executive order signed by our governor, Governor Henry McMaster, in 2018. That's where we begin this week on Connect to the Capitol. Thanks for joining us this morning. The usual suspects are here, Catherine Glenn Foster and Dave Wilson, to talk about a lot of things. We want to begin briefly with this Planned Parenthood case. A lot of folks have made it only about the abortion issue, but that's just a piece.
It really is, and it's not really the heart of it. It's what brought this about, and if you listen to either side in front of the Supreme Court there, the different rallies, the pro-choice side, the pro-life side, both sides were in fact talking about abortion, but that's not really what's at stake here. The legal question here is simply this: whether it's the state or a patient who gets to decide who that patient's doctor will be if they're on Medicaid. And that's really it. That's the only question that the Supreme Court is deciding. Nothing about abortion. It's just that executive order defunded Planned Parenthood because they perform. Exactly.
Because they perform the service.
And the state has a very unique way of viewing this because abortion has been a big issue. It is a pro-life state in South Carolina, and this was an opportunity for the governor to do what the governor wanted to do, which was to actually find a way to take money from the Medicaid funds that come into South Carolina going to Planned Parenthood to fund abortions. We're going to have a conversation with Attorney General Alan Wilson in just a little bit, who will help to break some of this down, and y'all have had a good conversation with him, or will be shortly. And I think the thing about this, though, Catherine, you've done a case very similar to this at the federal level. And I think when you take a look at this, everybody else is trying to make this about abortion, but it has been a deeper issue.
It really has. So I've argued essentially this very case, but from a different state. And in that case, again, the question was simply who has the right to choose the doctor? Is it the state? Is it the patient? And so that's what the court's looking at here. It's really nothing else. In each instance, it was brought about because the state decided to defund Planned Parenthood over abortion. And so that's how these cases came about. We've seen half a dozen or so of these cases. And each time when the state or Planned Parenthood asked the Supreme Court to review, the Supreme Court said, no, we won't review this matter. This time they said yes. And so now we may finally get at least one piece of the puzzle put into place.
We had a quote directly from Justice Clarence Thomas in that case you're referencing.
In one of those cases that went on, Justice Clarence Thomas really kind of took it to his fellow members of the Supreme Court. He said, so what explains the court's refusal to do its job here? I suspect it has something to do with the fact that some respondents in these cases are named Planned Parenthood. That was in Gee versus Planned Parenthood, where Thomas basically turned around and said in his writings on this, y'all, somebody's got to get in here. Somebody's got to do the job. You've got different areas of the court that are giving different answers in lower courts, and you can explain this better. They were not always agreeing on that, and they kept going back to the Supreme Court and saying, what do we do here? And they have finally come to the place, I think, of bringing an answer as to whether or not who's responsible for choosing a doctor when it comes to your Medicaid coverage.
Right, and that's especially important because one of the things that arose, one of the problems that arose from the court's refusal to do its job is that a patient on one side of a state line and a patient on another side of a state line, one could choose their own doctor and the other couldn't. And of course, we're not talking about patients going and getting abortions. We're not talking about that
health
here.
Screenings.
Right, we're talking about cancer screenings. We're talking about STI treatments, basic care. And that is what this patient is asking to be able to defend.
Attorney General Alan Wilson again is going to be talking about that case.
Yes.
He wasn't in Washington for the presentation. You were this week. Also, he's going to be talking about cyber crimes against children, violent crimes perpetrated online against children as well. He's got a lot to talk about, and also DEI. That's another one of the topics we're going to hit this week. very spirited discussion we're expecting. We got some of the best in here to talk about that
do.
that we brought to the studio before. The House becoming one of the first, or the first, making South Carolina the first state in the country to approve the framework for a Trump-style DEI policy based on his executive order.
I think this is where, after 8 hours of debate,
It was long.
It was a long, drawn-out discussion. We have a discussion coming up. Y'all are going to be talking with Antoine Seawright and Representative Jermaine Jackson from here in Richland County to talk about what actually went on and what, ironically, was actually included in the original version of this. I mean, it was like copy-paste what was in the Trump administration and in the Trump executive order and put it into South Carolina. And there's so many different pieces and parts of federal law versus state law that it didn't mix very well at all.
No, there's things in there that I think people who voted on it don't even know are in there.
And
That's the case with many
That's
bills,
right.
many
Yes.
thick ones.
As with anything like this, it's going to get watered down.
Yeah.
And the real question is whether or not the Senate's even going to take this up. They've got a lot of other
The
things
clock's
on their
ticking,
plate.
and it probably won't. But again, that messaging is coming out of the State House on this particular issue, and is certainly concerned some people. So we're going to have a good conversation about that. Also, we're expected to hear from the Attorney General about the illegal immigration issue, and many other topics that we're going to get to before we get out of here. But we're going to get you now connected to the Capitol on this Sunday in South Carolina.
Fundamental right to health care should not be up for debate. Stop playing politics with our lives.
It's not a question of whether abortions are right or wrong or to what extent. It's a question of who has to pay for it.
On Wednesday, the governor, Henry McMaster, in Washington as the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in Medina versus Planned Parenthood. That issue, of course, stems from an executive order the governor signed in 2018. It yanked Medicaid funding from this state's 2 Planned Parenthood clinics. McMaster argued those payments amounted to a taxpayer subsidy for abortion. However, Planned Parenthood does provide other health services to Medicaid patients. We have a lot to talk about on that topic this week on Connect to the Capitol. Catherine Glenn Foster is here, and the Attorney General, Alan Wilson. It's been a while since you've been in our studio. We are glad to have you here.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
Welcome.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Always good to see
Thank
you.
you.
You too were at that hearing the
Yes.
other day.
Yes.
There's a lot at stake here that we want to talk to the AG about.
There really is. So if you could just share at a very high level just what is going on with this case. Most people don't necessarily understand the ins and outs, the intricacies of Medicaid funding and just what it means to defund and why someone would sue over that. So if you could just share what's going on here and how South Carolina is involved.
Well, absolutely. Well, this basically, if you look at it, Medicaid is given by the federal government to the states to be able to help low income or people who need certain medical services to go to certain medical service providers to get certain service paid for. In 2018, the governor did an executive order where he said, we're not going to allow medical service providers who conduct abortions to receive Medicaid from South Carolina from this grant. And as we all know, under the Hyde Amendment, you can't fund abortions with taxpayer dollars, but many believe that what people are attempting to do is if you give, say you give $1 million in Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood, you're freeing up $1 million of other funds to go to abortion. So it's a backdoor or indirect way to fund abortions with taxpayer dollars. So in South Carolina, we have said, if you're a person who uses Medicaid, as a way to pay for your medical services. You can go to any service provider you want, so long as they don't provide abortion services. We're not trying to deny you or prevent you from getting the health care that you need, but we have told folks like Planned Parenthood and any other medical service provider that conducts abortions that you're not entitled as a qualified or as a provider to receive Medicaid funding. And so that's what this lawsuit is about. Someone wanted to go to Planned Parenthood and say Planned Parenthood offers 10 services, cancer screening, STD screening, other types of screening, and they offer abortion. We're saying you can go get that screening elsewhere, you just can't get it at Planned Parenthood with Medicaid funding.
Right. Could be quite some time before the High Court makes a decision on this, so it'll be a wait and see situation.
Expecting it in June.
Okay, so still some time.
Couple
little bit,
months.
yeah, couple months.
So still some time.
Yes.
But here in the state capitol, at the State House right now, you also too are eyeing a bill, S-74,
Yes.
to protect this state's children in the online world. Stranger danger these days is a lot different than it was when all of us were children.
I mean, we were talking earlier off camera
Yeah.
about the days when your parents said be home before the streetlights come
Yeah.
on, and but now we have so much more to worry about. S-74 is a tool. It's already passed the Senate. It's at the House. We expect it to get traction. We want people to know what this bill will do. Currently, right now, we're out there in the Attorney General's office through our Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, going after predators and pedophiles who prey on our children. And in order to do that, sometimes if we see that someone is going to a child porn site or they're dealing in a child porn online, we can see their IP address, but we don't know their name or their physical address. So currently, under the current law, I have to go to the United States Attorney here in South Carolina to get them to do an administrative subpoena that allows us to go to the internet service provider and look at that IP address and find out John Doe at 123 Elm Street is the person at that IP address, and then we can get a search warrant to go to John Doe's house and get that computer to, to actually get the evidence that he's looking or peddling in child porn. This bill would cut out the U.S. Attorney. It would allow the Attorney General to do an administrative subpoena. So basically, it cuts out the red tape and it makes it easier to go after child predators. This is a universally acceptable bill. People should be supportive of it. Call your state house representative and tell them to support S-74 because it will allow us to go after child predators much better than we currently are able to.
So whether we're talking about Medina versus Planned Parenthood or this bill S-74, it really is about protecting South Carolina children.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. This is just another tool, another resources that state prosecutors, that the Attorney General can use. And again, we're not trying to violate people's constitutional rights. This just allows us to go find out where that potential child predator is currently living. We still have to go get a subpoena or a warrant to arrest them or to get their information.
Speaking of protecting children, just this past week, you and the state education superintendent, Ellen Weaver, were ringing the alarm bell about something known as the 764 movement, also online, but it is teens targeting teens. And this is frightening stuff, tied to potentially satanic cults, neo-Nazi groups.
Yeah, so I met with the Federal Bureau of Investigation about a week or two ago here in the Columbia office. They were incredible, great partner for us, and they brought to our attention this 764 movement that's going across the country, and it's actually landed here in South Carolina. And basically, 764 derives its name from the area code in Texas where it began, and it has its roots buried in neo-Nazi organizations and satanic organizations. And basically, it's people online, mostly children, people who are 14, 15, 16 years old, who are exploiting other children, although there are some adults doing it, but mostly kids exploiting kids. And it's basically the creation and promotion of online violent gore content. Basically, they're getting kids who are marginalized or at risk or possibly have suffer from anxiety or depression. They're bringing them into this group. They're talking them into performing certain types of gory content. Like, for instance, they will get them to cut themselves. I've seen videos of young people slicing their tongues, slicing their arms, mutilating animals, killing animals, engaging in bestiality. They do this on a live stream, it's recorded, and then these people use these videos to get these kids to up the ante, right? To level up and do something even more horrific. In other states, kids have even been talked into committing suicide for the online entertainment of people watching that live feed. This is going on now in South Carolina. We're very concerned. We're trying to raise awareness. I've said this 100 times. People would not let their children go around the world by themselves, but we allow them to go around the World Wide Web by themselves. And so if your kid is spending hours on end behind closed doors on their online platform, you need to be cognizant and you need to inspect what you expect of their use of the internet and go check on them.
Absolutely.
Frightening. Frightening.
It's horrible. It's just horrifying. What can we in South Carolina do about this?
That is a great question, and that is why I'm here. Honestly, I've talked with the FBI. First off, you need to look for the telltale signs. Obviously, and what I'm going to describe in teenagers could apply to any teenager in America, but teenagers exhibiting vast mood swings, maybe mood disorders or personality disorders, or suffering from anxiety or depression, or one potential red flag. Spending hours upon hours on end behind closed doors in their bedroom or in their basement is another one where they never come out. Seeing a teenager wearing long sleeves and long pants when it's 95 degrees outside, right? What are they covering up? Because honestly, a lot of this gory content is them mutilating themselves. They may be covering up the wounds. These are some of the things. Parents need to have a conversation with their teens. You need to keep those doors open. You need to monitor their internet use. Again, just because they're in the house and under your roof while you're downstairs eating doesn't mean they're safe. This isn't like in the 80s when Brian and I were growing up and the streetlights come on, you come home. They can be in the house and be exploited and harmed just as easily as if they were across town or on the other side of the world.
Yeah, something we didn't have to worry about, but is a very real threat now. One more question that will lead us into a brief conversation about the illegal immigration issue that I know you're very involved in. We had a tragedy play out here in Columbia just in the last few days. A USC student killed in a hit and run. The driver accused said to be wanted by ICE. Not a known gang member, but still wanted by ICE, not being documented here in this country. That touches on a subject that you are very passionate about.
I have been in touch with ICE this week, and my office has been in touch with local law enforcement and prosecution agencies to talk about this matter. At this time, I can't say too much because we're evaluating several courses of action as it relates to this, but this is something I have been hammering home. The last month or so, I have met with literally or nearly every sheriff in the state and numerous police chiefs in municipalities around South Carolina to engage in what is called the 287G program. It is a federal program that allows local law enforcement to perform immigration enforcement actions like ICE. And it's under the supervision and training of ICE, but this is going to allow us to go after and target violent people who are here from other countries like MS-13 and now Tren de Aragua. I want to tell you this, about 7 or 8 months ago, I was meeting with federal officials on the southern border down in the El Paso region of Texas. They were telling me that Tren de Aragua is now in the United States, but they hadn't quite made it to South Carolina yet. That is no longer the case. In the last 7 months, they are here. This is a violent extremist organization stood up by the Maduro regime in Venezuela. They are helping pipe in fentanyl and other types of illicit drugs. They are engaged in violent gang activity just like MS-13. And so we want to do everything we can to empower local law enforcement to support federal ICE initiatives to remove these violent criminals from our streets and our communities.
Powerful stuff, important stuff. Attorney General Wilson, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Always good to see you. And you are going to have a much more extended conversation at a Connect to the Capitol Extra with the AG. Of course, you can find that at WACH.com.
What will you do? Show some courage.
And what is the opposite of inclusion? That's exclusion.
Everybody knows right from wrong, but the key is, will you do right rather than doing wrong?
This bill ensures that merit matters again in South Carolina. It restores fairness, it restores unity, and it restores American values.
Well, just a few nights ago, despite some strong opposition from state Democrats, the House approving a plan that mirrors President Trump's executive order that eliminates DEI mandates in governmental agencies, also on campuses, schools and universities in the state of South Carolina. The first state in the country to approve a framework to put this in place. Worth noting that it is not yet the law in South Carolina. Still a process ahead as we start a discussion on DEI here in South Carolina. Catherine Glenn Foster, this one has been a talking point for quite some time. We invite Antoine C. Wright and also Representative Jermaine Johnson of Richland County in to talk about this as well. We saw you in the well making your point, an impassioned speech by a lot of members of the House just the other night about this.
Yeah, you know, it's a situation where we have to look and see and be careful about what we're doing in this state, because this is not only affecting higher education, this is affecting all of us. This is affecting our businesses, and I really didn't feel like this was right for the state of South Carolina or for the country. You know, we have to be careful with how we're leading the state.
You know, I would just say that South Carolina has a history of being last in the things we should be first in, and first in the things we should be last in. This is a prime example. It shows that instead of moving forward, we're moving full steam backwards. This cut, copy, and paste from Washington, D.C. to South Carolina, and then this Control, Alt, Delete to things that have always brought us together and knitted us together as South Carolinians. Diversity, equity, inclusion for some means different things, but in this moment, I think Republicans are trying to make this a racially charged thing. So it's divide, exclude, and insult. Instead of trying to find ways to bring people together, they're trying to find ways to divide our state and put us in a place that our parents and grandparents, whether you're black or white, would probably tremble in their graves about.
That's right.
Sure. Now, we have heard some say that ending DEI would restore a meritocracy. We also have heard the argument that actually DEI levels the playing field and allows the people with the most merit to succeed and be in the roles that they need to be in. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that's a bunch of misinformation, disinformation. Down south, we call it lies. The fact of the matter is our country has been better and South Carolina has been better because people with the right resume, the right cachet, as we say in the neighborhood, have been able to get their fair shot. Otherwise, your name sometimes gets you dismissed before people even see your resume. And we've seen countless examples of that. And quite frankly, the people who benefit the most from diversity, equity, and inclusion have been white women. And there's data to back that up. And so I think what Republicans are trying to do is essentially going to backfire long term. Think about this. When we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not just a one-way track about race. It's gender, it's size, it's shape, it's disability, special needs. There's so many things that fall under the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that's the story that needs to be told, not just by Jermaine and I, but by people who do not look like us.
That's right. And you know, the situation that we're really seeing here is how it's really going to affect business. Because we've heard historically how amazing South Carolina is doing in business. Our governor talks about how South Carolina is open for business and we're a business state and we're a handshake state and we have all this amazing stuff happening here. But then you say DEI is killing business. Then on the other hand, you say DEI is the worst thing about South Carolina. It's the worst thing about the government. But on the other hand, we're always touting about how amazing our people are, how amazing our workforce is. So which one is it? Are we going to say we're a fantastic state with business? We've been doing all these great things. Our unemployment rate is very low. We have companies coming in. We just announced Scout Motors coming in here and building these things. Which one is it? Make up your mind. Is it right or is it wrong? Which one are we going to do here?
Well, think about this. We passed DEI legislation in the House, but we're one of very few states that have not passed a hate crime after Mother Emanuel. And think about all the success that Republicans have touted under their leadership for the past 20 years. Now, after one presidential election, all of a sudden we need to get rid of some of the very things that have made South Carolina attractive on the market. Regardless of what people say or not, diversity, equity, and inclusion is true to us as Americans. E pluribus unus, out of one, many, diversity. The 13th and 14th Amendment that gives equal protection under the law. That's equity. We pledge allegiance to the American flag under the United States of America. That's inclusion. With liberty and justice for all. That's inclusion. So those elements are who we are as Americans. Shame on anyone who wants to divide us because of political gain.
As we look ahead, it still has to get through the Senate. They still got their hands full with the budget. They haven't touched it yet. Do you think this gets through this year, or is this... Does it stop?
Well, personally, I think the Senate has more important things to handle over there. You know, they're taking up the budget. They have to take up this energy bill that they have over there as well. And I think if we want businesses to continue to flourish in our state, we need to make sure that they have the resources necessary to continue to come in here. So, you know, when we have this energy bill that they have, I think that's going to take precedence over anything else.
Catherine, you're going to...
So we hear so much, you mentioned the budget, we hear so much about competitiveness. South Carolina wanting to bring business in and be competitive in the business environment, and especially among our southeast neighbors. So from that perspective, we're trying to bring in countries from Europe, from other parts of the country, from all over the world, and yet we're also trying to close off that diversity that we also claim to want. It just the cognitive dissonance really strikes me. But I wanted to ask you in particular what it was like standing up and speaking out on this, because your words were so powerful, and I wanted to get your take as someone who was there in the chamber, live, trying to fight something that you were concerned about.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I wanted to back up just a little bit because as a member of the LCI committee, I'm on the committee to help bring business to this state. And one of the things that unites us on this LCI committee is the diversity that's on the LCI committee. We take trips together as the LCI committee, not just, you know, Republicans or Democrats, but as a united force to make sure that we are bringing the best business to South Carolina, putting forth the best policy for South Carolina businesses, to make sure we have the best regulations for South Carolina businesses. And I was added on there because of my unique perspective when it comes to business and being an entrepreneur as an African African American in this state. So when I stood up there at the well to talk about what we were doing, I utilized it as a teaching opportunity to them to say, hey, listen, did you not consider this? Did you look at this? Do you understand this part? And a lot of the stuff, I don't think they even read the entire bill because they didn't understand the things that were in the bill. When I brought the original bill up to them about the situation of what it was going to do, about how it was going to affect hospitals with being able to target specific disparities in these marginalized communities, they didn't know that was even in there. They didn't know that was going to happen. We know 1 in 325 African Americans have this sickle cell anemia trait. They didn't know that these hospitals will no longer be able to do a targeted campaign specifically asking African Americans to come in and get checked out. What about women when it has breast cancer? They can no longer do targeted campaigns for women to make sure that they can get checked for breast cancer. Men and prostate cancer. They can't do any targeted campaigns for men about that as well. They say DEI is the bad thing, but understand that this is what's saving lives. And I had to make sure that I talked about that and make sure that they understood that this affects all of us, all of your families, anybody who's ever lost somebody from breast cancer, prostate cancer, or any of these diseases, understand this will affect you as well.
I would just say if you're a veteran, if you're left-handed, if you're short, if you're from the disability and special needs community, I mean, there's so many things that fall under the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just black versus white. Right. Our state is changing. The country is changing. The browning of America is happening. This idea of white men having heavy-handed power ruling our country, ruling our state, and ruling our communities does not exist. And so the question for South Carolinians, whether it is lawmakers or leaders or just businesses, how will you respond to the moment ahead? Not the moment we're in, but the moment ahead. And if businesses step up to the plate and lead by example, I think that we can send a message to the Capitol, and then that will then have a trickle-down effect.
That's right.
Antoine Seawright, always so good to have you. Representative Jermaine Johnson, good discussion. Catherine will have an extended conversation with you in a Connect to the Capitol Extra on our website, WACH.com. All right, we're going to close out Connect to the Capitol this week with some quick hitters. Important ones, though. The Senate working through an energy reform plan here in South Carolina. We've talked about this topic since January. We need to up the production to match the population growth here in South Carolina. Steps are being taken. The House has passed a version. Now the Senate has passed a version.
That now will then go back to the House. Will it matched up? Probably not. The House probably will not necessarily concur with what the Senate has done. It'll go to a conference committee where 3 members of the House and 3 members of the Senate will come together and they'll work on a compromise plan. But apparently big energy was a big winner with this. And it'll be very interesting to see how all of that plays itself out because, as we've talked about before, demand is high and getting higher because of population growth and high-tech and manufacturing businesses coming to South Carolina.
Yeah, big energy, you said, is the winner, but will little customer be the winner? At the end of the day, that's pretty important. So we're going to see what comes next.
And this is the natural fallout, the growth, when we have state competitiveness. When we bring business in, which we want to do, need to do, then we need more energy to meet those needs. And that's what this is all about.
At the end of the day, that's all that matters. It's all that matters. There's a lot of people are coming here and a lot of businesses, big ones, coming here, and they need that power. Another quick hitter, something that has been talked and talked and talked some more. Well, guess what? April the 21st, the Senate's going to talk about that man, the State Treasurer, Curtis Loftus. They made a move this past week to set a hearing that could ultimately remove him from office over that $1.8 billion accounting error. He will have 3 hours to respond.
That's
to
3
their
hours
claims
on the Senate floor.
You are correct, sir.
Yes.
That is that has not been seen in modern history in South Carolina. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays itself out. If it goes anything like any of the hearings that we've seen with Treasurer Loftus, it will be a spicy Sunday in South Carolina.
And there will be a lot of visual aids. There will be pie charts. There will be graphics. There will be everything you could possibly think of. There'll be a lot of that there. The case will be made. Finally, this is one that happened later in the week. Dr. Edward Simmer, been a state official for years, has been running what is the new Department of State Health, what we used to know as DHEC, but now it's been busted up into 2 agencies. Governor McMaster's nominee to run that new agency. He was voted down.
He was.
By the Senate Medical Affairs Committee. Based on the pushback and the people wearing stickers crossing his face out in the audience, it's not surprising, but it's rare. that a GOP governor is turned back by his own party with a nominee.
Exactly. Certainly rare. And the questioning was especially interesting, the pushback.
Sure.
Really the grandstanding against him on issues like COVID, vaccines, things like that. Yeah, there was a lot of...
So we're back to the drawing board.
It goes back to the drawing board. But there was a lot of places in here where there was a lot of Fauciism that was played all over him. And that was a place that really kind of put some senators in some very difficult places when you have people who are absolutely vehemently against this man because, as Catherine said, of his positions on certain things like COVID vaccine and other things.
Which are typical and common among leading health professionals, especially in administrations.
They certainly are. So well, that's another one of those that's coming up next because we have to see who's going to run that agency at some point when we go back to the drawing board. But that sets up a lot of weeks right there. Not only this week ahead, but we've done what we can. We have hit a lot of things. We had some great guests this week.
Really have.
And good conversations, and we're glad that you can join us here every week.
And some great follow-up conversations. If you want to follow
the extras.
our extras, if you're not following us on Facebook yet, connect to the Capitol. We try to make sure that you have these and they're available. If you see something that you like, please take the time, share it with your friends so that they also know what's going on, because we want them to be just as connected as you are.
And there may be some things that we're not even thinking of that folks watching might be too. Bring it to our attention.
Exactly.
Because anything that happens in that House of State affects your house as well.
Yes, it does.
So that's what we do here. Thank you again for joining us. As we get you connected to the Capitol, we'll see you again next Sunday.
Have a great week.